Hello everyone and welcome back. In this lesson we're going to continue to add error handling capabilities to our application. In the last few lessons we have added error handling here to our home component that we can see here on the screen via the catch error RxJS operator and the show errors method from our new messages service. Let's remember that, going back here to our application root component, that our instance of messages service is only available to the application root component and to all its child components, including the home component. This messages service instance that we see here, declared on the provider's property of the application root component, is visible, for example, to the messages component that we see here at the level of the application root component template. So it's this error messages panel that we have seen on previous lessons that allows us to display errors to the user from multiple child components of the application root component. Now we would like to do something different, which is to add error handling capabilities to the edit course dialog that we see here. So in the particular case of the edit course dialog, we don't want to necessarily use the same messages component that the home component was using. And there are several reasons for that. The first reason is that the edit course dialog is a component that exists in a completely different branch of the Angular component tree than the application root component. So for example, this instance here of the messages service is not visible at the level of the dialog. So if we would now try to inject the messages service here in our course dialog component, we would get an error saying that there is no provider for messages service. This is a very important point. The service declared here on the provider's property of the application root component will only be visible to the component and its child components, but not to the course dialog component, which exists in a completely separate branch of the component tree. So that's the first reason why we would like to use a different messages service here in our course dialog component. Now, even if the course dialog component and the application root component would be on the same component tree, we would still want to use here a new instance of messages service. And why is that? This is because in the particular case of a course dialog, we want to be able to display the errors to the user here directly on top of the dialog. So we would like the error messages to be displayed here inside the dialog itself and not outside the dialog on the application-wide messages panel that sits on the main screen just below this red bar that we see here on the background. The user would not be able to conveniently see the error messages if we would use the global error messages panel. So here in our course dialog component, the first thing that we're going to add is a new instance of our messages component. This is so that we can display an error message panel here inside the edit course dialog whenever, for example, an error happens on the backend whenever we try to save a new version of a course. So now we have here a different messages component. It's not the same instance of messages that we have here in our application root component. So there will be two instances of the messages component in our application. One at the level of the root component and another at the level of our course dialog. Now all we need is a way for our course dialog to be able to interact with its own messages panel. And just like we did before, we are going to be able to interact with the messages panel via a shared messages service instance. As we have mentioned before, we cannot inject here in our constructor the same instance that we have declared at the level of the application root component. So this attempt of injecting here the messages service would result in a dependency injection error. However, what we can do in a very similar way to what we did with the loading service is to declare here a new instance of the messages service, which is local to our course dialog component. So this new instance of messages service will only be visible to the course dialog component and its child components. This instance will also be visible to the messages panel that we have here inside our course dialog. So that's exactly what we need in order to interact with our messages panel from our course dialog. We can now use here the messages service and add error handling capabilities to our dialog. We are going to do so by using the RxJS pipe syntax here in our save course observable, and we're going to be using the RxJS catch error operator. The catch error operator is going to receive here the root cause of the error. So the first thing that we're going to do is to define a new error message that we want to display to the user. Let's simply write could not save course. Now we want to log this error message here to the console, but we also want to log the root technical cause of the error, which we have available here on the catch error operator. Now we are not going to be showing this error to the user because this is usually a technical error, such as for example a stack trace, and this would not make sense to the user. Instead, we are going to be showing only this user-friendly error message by calling our messages service instance. Let's remember this service instance is local here to our course dialog. It's not visible in other branches of the Angular application tree, and this service is what allows us to interact with our local error messages panel that we are going to be displaying here inside the dialog, as opposed to here at the level of the application main screen. Now, in order to complete the implementation here of catch error, we need to return an observable. This observable is meant to replace this observable here that has errored out. Now, in our case, we simply want to rethrow our error up the RxJS chain. So we're going to be using here the throw error RxJS utility, and we're going to pass in here the same root cause of the error. So yes, we are replacing this observable here with another observable, but that new observable is going to immediately error out with the same error cause. This will effectively interrupt the operator chain, and this will allow us to display to the user a user-friendly error message. We are now almost ready to try things out, so what we're going to need is a way of having a failing save request here in our course dialog. Just like we did before, we are going to switch here to our server that we are running, that is a small express server, and we're going to look for the save course route. This is the express route that gets triggered whenever we click here on save. Let's have a look at it. So as you can see, it's a very simple implementation, and we even have here some code that we can uncomment that will allow us to easily fail a save course request. So let's temporarily uncomment this code so that we can simulate an error and see the error handling functionality in action. Now, if you remember, in order to trigger an error in the home component, we also modified here the get courses route in order to always throw an error. In order to be able to access the dialog, we need to fix this get all courses endpoint. Let's comment out this functionality here, which was forcing an error each time that we loaded here the courses on the main screen, and let's put back the correct working functionality again. With this in place, we are now going to restart our server. So we are going to head over here to the terminal, and we are going to hit Ctrl C on the terminal window where we have our server running, and we are going to start the server again on localhost 9000. With this in place, we can now test out our new functionality. So I'm going to switch here to a larger window, and I'm going to reload the application just to confirm that the get courses endpoint has been fixed. So as we can see, no error was thrown. Now, if we click here on edit course and we try to do some modification here on the course data and we click on save, notice what will happen here. Now we can see here an error messages panel here inside the courses dialog, displaying the message could not save course as expected. And with this, we have finished the implementation of our error handling functionality in our course dialog. Now, in the next section of the course, we are going to talk about state management for data, such as, for example, the courses data that we see here. Before starting the new section, let's leave our application in a functional state. So we are going to switch back here to our IDE, and we are going to open here our save course route in our server, and we are going to comment out here the functionality that was simulating a save course error. We are going to switch back here to the terminal, and we are going to stop our REST server, and we are going to now start it again using npm run server. This way we have again a fully functional backend, and with that we are going to be able to start adding state management to our application using observable data services.